This is the Build Wealth Canada podcast, episode number 28.
Welcome to the Build Wealth Canada podcast, where it's all about becoming debt-free, accelerating your wealth, and taking control of your money. Now, here's your host, Cornell Schreiber.
Hey, it's Cornell, and welcome to the Build Wealth Canada show. And when it comes to the show, there are really two questions that I get asked more than any other. So the first is how to actually buy ETFs, so how to actually be an index investor, what tools to use, which ETFs are great ones to consider, and how to actually do it step by step. So that's why I built a course to basically answer that question. But the second question that I get asked most often is from Canadians who are either in their 50s or 60s, are basically about to retire, or they will be retiring in about, let's say 10 years or less, and are looking to learn how to do it properly. So how do you withdraw from your portfolio properly to pay as little tax as possible, for example? What are some of the best practices and things to look out for so that you don't run out of money during your retirement? Now, obviously, when it comes to retirement planning like this, things get really complicated, and the risks are ridiculously high since you're basically at a life stage where you're going to start spending the money that you've basically been saving and investing throughout your entire life. So the stakes are really high. We're dealing with a lot of real money here, and the terrifying thing is that there really are no do-overs. So in other words, if you mess this up, you can't just hit the rewind button, get all your money back, and basically try again. So because of this, it's extremely important to get this right, as the worst case scenario is basically you running out of money during your retirement, which is obviously a pretty big deal and pretty catastrophic to most people. So if you do run out of money, then going back to the workforce may not be an option due to the physical and or mental health that you may be in at that particular time. And that's something that there's only so much of that you can control. And at the same time, employers might also have a preference to, let's say, hiring someone younger that they can basically pay less money for and that they can groom to hopefully stay with the company long term. Unlike you may not be as attractive as an employee at that age because they know that you'll basically retire at the first chance that you get. Also, with all the development in medical technology, now more than ever, we're faced with this new challenge of living too long and actually outliving our money. So this makes having a good financial plan that you basically review with a professional periodically even more important to basically ensure that you are living the type of lifestyle that you want in retirement while minimizing the risks of running out of money. Now, I'm not trying to instill fear or anything like that, but I say all this just to help anybody out there realize that it is critically important and that doing it wrong can actually be catastrophic to both you and your partner's life potentially. And so you have to take accountability and responsibility for your financial situation and not just hope that everything will somehow turn out okay. So with that said, I'm basically of the opinion that since the stakes at this stage of life are so high, you need a customized financial plan specific to your particular situation. This is definitely one of those times where you can't just read a blog post about the top 10 retirement tips and basically assume that you're all set, that you know everything there is to know or enough, and that some general guidance is basically good enough for you as well. You simply can't do this because the stakes are just too high. So you running out of money in your retirement is obviously a pretty big deal, and there are too many variables in your life that can change the plan drastically. So for example, the assets and liabilities that you have are different from between you and another person. The income sources you have in retirement will vary from person to person. The dependents you'll have, whether it's your children, maybe it's your parents, your health history, your goals, your ambitions for retirement, the inflation, the market returns that you've endured over your lifetime. The size of your emergency fund can have an impact too. The lifestyle you want in retirement obviously has an impact. Family dynamics might change, like marriages, deaths, inheritance, and risk tolerance as well. And really the list goes on and on and on. There's just so many different variables to consider. So we can't just have sort of a silver bullet, one solution, one best practice that, if everybody just follows this one thing, everyone will be happy and successful and everything will be great. Now, unfortunately, it's not that simple. And so to address and really help you with this, I'd like to introduce you to Sandy Martin, who is a professional fee-for-service financial planner here in Canada. And now Sandy has actually been requested by listeners of the show. And in this interview, I chat with Sandy about the top questions that I've been asked from Build Wealth Canada listeners, especially those in their 50s and 60s that are nearing or at that retirement age. All right. So enjoy the interview. Thanks for submitting those questions. Now, just to give you a bit of a background, Sandy is an expert in helping Canadians answer questions specific to their situation, such as, are you on track to retire? Did you maybe miss something in your analysis? Are you saving enough for retirement? What's the best way to take out income from your portfolio to minimize taxes based on all of your assets and all of your income sources? How much do you need to save so that you can retire comfortably? When can you retire? And can you fully retire now, or can you maybe semi-retire now? And when should you choose to take your CPP and OAS? Very big question, very common question as well. What kind of lifestyle can you expect when you retire based on your current savings and your current savings rate? And of course, how can you help ensure that you don't run out of money in your retirement? Now, if you'd like to learn more about Sandy, or you can even get a free 30-minute consultation with her to basically start tackling some of these questions, you can reserve a time slot with her by going over to the show notes at buildwealthcanada.ca/28. So just the number 28. It's totally free. Sandy's fantastic, extremely knowledgeable about all of this, and I'm sure you'll get a lot out of chatting with her. All right, now let's get into the interview with Sandy. All right, Sandy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
No problem. Now, before we dive in and get all technical, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm an enormous nerd. So that's the one thing to know about me. I really like talking to people, and I like talking about all sorts of things. Obviously, I really enjoy talking about money, but I find people very interesting, and I can occasionally keep asking questions when it's long past time to wind up a conversation.
Sounds good. And you're a fee-for-service financial planner as well.
Yes, sir.
Can you tell us a little bit about that too?
Yeah, well, I describe myself as an ex-banker. I spent a long time working in the bank system, which I have a lot to say about, but not here. So I became a fee-for-service financial planner back in 2013. And so, of course, I speak directly to clients and charge them for my time. And talk about kind of all sorts of things. I think a lot of the things we're going to talk about today are specifically kind of are around the retirement set of questions that people have. But I just get to talk to people about money and goals and meaning and fulfillment and all of those things.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah. And the way that, because I'm just trying to think now with some Canadians, maybe they're not familiar what a fee-for-service financial planner is. I've brought it up many times in past episodes, but in case this is the first episode someone's listening to, can you maybe tell us a little bit about how you work versus, let's say somebody just, they bank at some bank and they see, I can get a free financial, quote unquote free, because it's not really free, but free financial planner to help me with things. And so, how is it that you're different?
Sure. Kind of traditionally, financial planning has been tied with investment advice and paid for through the commissions earned or the management expenses earned on investment product sales. So, for example, an annuity contract that pays the insurance broker to give you that advice about whether you should purchase an annuity or not. Mutual funds pay the person sitting at the desk to give you the advice as to whether they're suitable for you or not, and whether they're, kind of investing without worrying about the product itself. Whether you're on track for retirement or any of the things that people think about when they think about speaking to somebody who says they're a financial planner. So in that system, it's all product and transaction driven, right? So even in a bank, that person sitting behind the desk doesn't necessarily get paid directly by the commissions or the management expenses on the mutual fund. The branch itself earns income, the bank earns income, and then they pay a salary to that person sitting at the bank. But all of their performance reviews, whether they've done a quote unquote good job or not, that's all based on the amount of revenue they've brought into the bank that's attached to a financial product. So a credit card or a loan or an investment or any of those things. Which means that if you are actually looking to purchase financial products, those people know a lot about financial products. Often they only know kind of the financial product that the bank has deemed most profitable.
Right.
Or has kind of told them about in a sales meeting or set a target for. But so those people know about products, but if you're looking for something that's not transaction specific, so can I afford to quit my job in 5 years and start my own business? And what would be involved in that? And what should I plan for? And what's safe? And then how do I plan for retirement after that, for example? That doesn't have a product, an obvious product attached to it. And so the people who are compensated for product sales are either going to not really be able to help you because that's not their expertise, or from kind of a business perspective, that's not the model that they've set themselves up for. So spending 6 hours with you talking about your goals doesn't lead to a product sale, and therefore they don't get paid, and that's not a smart business person. So that's the infrastructure that's been set up in Canada. Fee for service simply means there's no product sale. The product, well, there is. I mean, the product is my advice and my expertise, and you pay directly for that, and there's nothing else included in that transaction. It's you give me money, I give you advice, the end.
Right, and it's very custom. You're not selling anything on the back end where you're saying where your advice is it could potentially be driven by a conflict of interest because you're getting some commission on the back end by selling the mutual funds or something of that nature, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of scope for conversation there. I mean, we could spend, I'm sure, a couple of hours
Yeah,
just talking about the regulatory framework in Canada.
yeah.
But yes, essentially that's the point.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, I mean, the way I personally look at it is, it's kind of somebody like Sandy. It's kind of like hiring a lawyer or an accountant, right? Where they have their area of expertise, and so in Sandy's case, it's financial planning, kind of money management, things of that nature. And so you just like you would pay a lawyer an account, you pay them whatever kind of you agree on for whatever service they're going to provide you, and they give you advice based on your specific situation, and it's very custom, and they have your best interest at heart, as opposed to somebody that says, okay, I'll do it really cheap or I'll do it for free, but I'll get paid on the back end from the things I sort of sell you. And then, because then there could be a lot of conflict of interest there as well, right? Because now, are they being honest? Are they recommending something to you because it's the best choice for that person? Or are they recommending that to you because they might get a bonus or a promotion at work or whatever the case may be for selling the most of that particular product, right? So there's a lot of this kind of sketchiness, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, I believe there are really good people that work in the industry the
Mhm.
way that it is now. It's just the
Sure.
whole infrastructure is set up to reward a certain set of behaviors, and
Hmm.
which we would call conflict, right? But it's very difficult, I think. Kind of fee for service planning and financial planning uncoupled from product sales is fairly new. Like it's a really newborn kind of profession, and so I think there's an element of risk for somebody who was at a bank or was in that commission structure to move to this type of structure. I can see why it seems sort of daunting. So anyways,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm trying to be fair to the people that are still behind the desks while
For sure, for
while
sure.
talking about their infrastructure.
For sure. Yeah, no, and I'm definitely not saying, everyone in this particular model is bad or good
Yeah.
or anything like that. There's obviously good people and bad people in different, under each model, I would say. But it's good to know sort of what the different models are. And like you said, how they're set up, so that you can kind of strategically make the decision for yourself, and then being fully informed before you pull the trigger and decide to go with someone like Sandy or someone at your bank or whatever the case may be. So yeah, okay, that sounds good. So all right, let's dive into the questions. So one of the
I told you.
what so one of the questions I get asked most often by Canadians who listen to the show, and this is specifically by Canadians who are, let's say, maybe 10 years from retirement, so they're starting to think about it. It's time to start planning for it, in more detail, and or Canadians who are just about to retire, or they have just retired, and now they're wondering, okay, well, I've been accumulating these assets, I've been putting money away into my RRSP or my TFSA my entire life, and now it's getting to that time where I'm going to have to start thinking, or actually start withdrawing money, from this set of assets that I have. Now, is there an order of preference that they should do this in terms so that they can save on taxes? Are there certain strategies or best practices that they should be using to basically do this in the most tax efficient and sort of best manner for them?
Yeah. So on the one hand, of course, my immediate knee-jerk response is to say, well, it totally depends on the person, of course.
Mhm.
In general, I tend to follow fairly common strategies. or advise common strategies. So if you have RRSPs, for example, and you know that for sure the year after you turn 71, you're going to have to start making withdrawals. In many cases, it makes sense to start your RRSP withdrawals by converting at least a portion of it to a RIF, which I think we're going to talk about in a little
Yeah,
while.
for sure.
As soon as you don't have any employment income anymore, or your employment income goes down because you've kind of transitioned to part-time work or something. And the reason for that is it's kind of, I always envision it as sort of a pressure cooker in a way. So your RSP, of course, it's not a bad thing if it's growing. But the more you have in your RRSP, your minimum withdrawals are based on the balance at the end of the year before you withdraw, right? So at age 72, you have to take out a certain percentage of the amount that was in your account at the end of the year that you turned 71. So if that you're going to have to do that because that's the minimum, that's government policy, then to me, it makes sense to kind of release that pressure valve a little bit and start withdrawing from your RRSP earlier than when you have to. Not because you necessarily, I mean, withdrawing from your investments and spending those withdrawals are two separate concepts, but at least start moving money out of your RRSP accounts. Pay the taxes on them gradually as you have lower income, let's say before CPP starts or before old age security starts. And smooth those RRSP taxable withdrawals over your lifetime instead of letting them build up and build up until age 71. And then suddenly you've got a much larger withdrawal than perhaps you need. That would be a kind of a good problem to have. But it's one that the default is 71. Many people kind of subscribe to default thinking. I guess I'll just save it until 71. And I think there are opportunities there to as I say, smooth that taxable income out a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And then what about a TFSA?
TFSAs, now, I like to see people invested in their TFSA. I think it's a waste of tax-free investment income if it's just interest, provided that it kind of, obviously you need your investments to match your risk tolerance and goals. But if you're investing inside your TFSA and you don't have any deadline for when you have to take that money out, to me it makes sense that you kind of layer your smoothed RRSP withdrawals first on top of any pensions, your CPP, anything like that. And then on top of that, if you still need to supplement your RRSPs, you take money out of your tax-free savings account, or you view your tax-free savings account as your contingency fund that's still fully invested, according to your risk tolerance. I have to keep throwing that in there.
Right.
That's still fully invested, but because there is no ticking clock that says you have to take money out of it, it doesn't matter if it continues to grow until you need some of it to buy a new car at some point, or some of it to fund a transition into kind of a retirement facility or something, instead of long-term care insurance, maybe use your TFSA in that way. Obviously, those are very general, but to me, the TFSA comes very last.
Right. So would a good strategy be to, for example, somebody, let's say they're retired, they have very little or no income coming in now from regular employment, let's say. Mm-hmm. So they kind of release the valve, like you said, they take some money out of their RRSP and they take, let's say, enough out to, obviously this all depends on how much they actually need, but let's say, they take some out so that, let's say, they sort of reach the peak of that lowest income tax bracket. Mm-hmm. And then if they need any money on top, in addition to that, then maybe now they can take that some income from their TFSA, so that basically they still have that spending money, but are now, they're not getting taxed on that TFSA money, right? And so they're basically sort of in that lowest tax bracket the whole time. Do you think that's a good strategy?
Sure. I mean, of course, we're dancing around the issue that people have different spending needs.
Right. For sure. For sure.
And to me, that staying within a certain tax bracket, while kind of intellectually appealing, isn't necessarily the be-all and end-all of retirement income planning. But yes, I mean, in general, if you can happily spend just kind of below, if you can happily fund your necessary spending or desired spending and stay within that lowest tax bracket, yes, of course. Why wouldn't you?
For sure. Yeah, exactly. Because the way I could see it is, let's say you have a couple, and so they each have money that's saved up in the RRSPs, and so the one individual can withdraw money up to the limit of the lowest tax bracket. The second one does the same, and then after that, you say, okay, is this enough to live on? Is this the lifestyle we want? And if the answer is, well, no, we want more money, that we want to withdraw more money than just this, then you use your TFSA, and then that way you're sort of tax optimizing it, I would say, right? So that's kind of what I can see maybe working quite well, assuming once again that it meets the lifestyle that you want.
Yeah, it means
and that you can afford it.
Yeah, and it's sustainable in some way and kind of that
Right,
you're
right.
comfortable with. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, there's a lot of caveats.
So
with
many.
that. It's not like here's one golden rule that will work in every situation. Yeah. So no, but it's just kind of generally speaking. So yeah, obviously this comes with a lot of assumptions that it's the lifestyle they want. They actually have enough money saved, that it's sustainable, that they're not going to run out of money if they keep doing that over the long term. So obviously, yeah, there's a lot of these kind of extra caveats that you have to look into. But yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, because that's kind of what I've been strategizing on, even though I'm still quite a few years.
You have a ways to
from
go,
retirement.
Cornell.
But I am also a nerd, Sandy. So you understand.
I understand completely. The bane of my existence and also the joy.
All right. So my next question is that I think with Canadians, when it comes to retirement, they can fall into two groups. So we've got one group where they just want to do sort of that traditional full retirement where they just completely stop working. They live off their retirement savings. That's what they want to do, right? And then there's the other group, I think, that say, well, no, I do still want to sort of be a bit engaged. Maybe I want to do some consulting or start a business that I always want to start. So I'll still, I'll be doing something I enjoy doing, something I like, something I'm passionate about, but that actually also brings me some income. Maybe not as much as probably not as much as I did when I was working full time, but at least something extra. So can you talk about sort of those two approaches to retirement, and how does that affect things from a retirement planning perspective?
If we want to talk about general rules of thumb, the more income that you have that is not coming from your investments into retirement, the better off you are, right? Because the less you have to spend from your investments, especially in the early years, the more sustainable your nest egg is going to be, the more likely it's going to last for longer, right? And that coupled with the fact that most pension plans, like private pension plans, CPP, OAS, I don't know how long this policy will last, most of them reward you for deferring for a little while. And any stream of income in retirement that is guaranteed for your lifetime, indexed or partially indexed to inflation. Well, those are the two things. Guaranteed for your lifetime and indexed to inflation or partially indexed to inflation. Those are really valuable streams of income. So if you can, I'm trying to say 17 things at once. So if you work in retirement, you kind of slow down, there's three things happening. You're not taking as much from your investments because you're earning still some money. You're still using you're withdrawing from your human capital instead of your invested assets. You're either being able to delay and therefore increase the amount of money coming from your floor income, your guaranteed pensions. And potentially you still have the ability to save a little bit. You may not. That might not be true. So those things, all of those things help increase your retirement income sustainability because you're still earning income. If you're working up until age 71, you still are able to kind of take advantage of RRSP deductions. If you're not working completely, if it's just, look, I'm stopped, I'm done, I'm doing other things, then that's an admirable goal. Like I would never want to tell somebody, well, you probably should still work because it's healthier for you financially. It might not be healthy for you mentally. If you're not working, then it means, at a certain point, you've stopped withdrawing from your human capital, you're withdrawing from your invested assets and from your pension assets. And it means you need, especially in the first few years, you need to be careful about the way that you withdraw because you don't have the ability to go out next month and earn some more money at your part-time job or get another consulting contract. Your options are more limited and your money is more finite. Other than that, there's 100 things we could say, but does that answer the question?
For sure. And I think, we're kind of moving a bit towards talking about sequence of returns risk, because this is very much kind of what you're talking a little bit about here, it sounds like as well. So maybe I'll skip forward a few questions and let's talk about sequence of returns risks. Can you define what that actually is for those that haven't heard of it before, and then how can we protect ourselves from it? And this is kind of one of the answers is, well, you work a bit in your retirement. Sounds like, I mean, that's kind of, we sort of, we just kind of answered that a little bit, right? Because you could just slow down, work a bit less, but still work a little bit in your retirement in those years when you are most vulnerable, and then that will kind of help cushion you if something goes wrong, so that you don't have to draw on your investments necessarily. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Please define sequence of returns and risks so that everyone knows what we're talking about.
Right. So we all talk about average rate of return, right? Like, well, I think there's going to be we'll have a 6% rate of return over the next 15 years. Well, or we've had stocks have averaged 8% over the past 140 years of recorded stock market history, or whatever those statistics are. Those numbers are the average, right? So you take them all up and you add them together, and maybe you take the geometric or you take the arithmetic, whatever, and you come up with this amount it doesn't matter what order those returns came in. You just, at the end of 10 years, you got 6% and you were very happy. It matters when you're it matters when you're adding money to your investments, what the sequence of return risk or sequence of returns is. But it matters more when you're withdrawing from your investments, because if you have $500,000 at the beginning of your retirement period and you have to withdraw money in the first year, and in the first year you have a 15% return, well, presumably at the end of the year, you actually have more money than when you started with, because you're probably not withdrawing 15%, I hope. Conversely, if you start retirement and you have to withdraw and you get minus 15 returns, which could, if you're in a 50-50 or a 60-40 portfolio, which a lot of retirees are, or even less, you could presumably have a drawdown of 10 to 15%, right? If you are withdrawing money from your investments and you have poor returns in the first few years of retirement, it means that you've taken money out of a declining portfolio balance, and there's less money to go around when the market inevitably recovers, right? So you participate less in the recovery because you've withdrawn money and spent it on necessary spending. So it's not just the average return that you receive; it's the order in which you receive those returns. That's the thought of sequence of return risk, because there's actually a lot of really good written resources. Like Moshe Malevsky is one of the researchers at Schulich School of Business at York that writes really, really ably about that. There's a lot of resources if you want to kind of dive deeper into that. Now, if we want to talk about avoiding sequence of return risks, there's only two ways to do that. You don't spend anything out of your portfolio. For most people, that's not a realistic option. If you have fully retired, the idea that you wouldn't spend anything out of your portfolio doesn't make a lot of sense. If you've partially retired, again, coming back to the unspoken rule about retirement income is it all depends on how you spend your money, actually, in reality. So if you can control your spending so that you don't have to withdraw from your investments, but you could if you wanted to, that's a way to protect yourself from sequence of returns. The other way to protect yourself is to not be invested in the markets at all. So that's when people talk about annuities, or kind of only investing in GICs, or keeping their money in cash under the mattress. That's a way to avoid sequence of return risk. There is no sequence of returns. There is. They're called interest rates, and conversely, the inflation that erodes it. But you're not going to see volatility. It doesn't matter if you spend money out of a $500,000 portfolio. If it's getting 2%, it's probably going to get 2% ongoing, right? It really is not a magnified problem.
Except then if you're not invested in the markets at all, let's say, because you take that approach, then it's like you're removing sequence of returns risk, but now you're adding on inflation risk, right? And so now because that could be eroding your, like right now, for example, right, where there's some people that buy sort of mutual funds where there's bonds, that are dominated by bonds, let's say, and then after all the fees and with the interest rates the way they are, they're basically earning nothing, right? And so there's kind of that piece as well, right?
Sure, but retirement income planning, or in fact, any kind of financial planning, it's all trade-offs. There's a very few levers that you can actually pull in retirement planning. So your spending is one of them, the amount of risk that you take and the volatility that you're willing to take and the sequence of return risk that you're willing to take, all of those things, and the length of time that you live. Well, you can't really pull that lever. But if, I speak with clients a lot about this, and part of the most important part, I think, of retirement income planning is not jumping right to when do you take your RSPs out and should you annuitize anything. It's what risks are you likely to face, and what risks are you worried about facing, and what are the trade-offs you're willing to make to avoid that risk. So if you are really worried about the markets going down precipitously in the first few years of retirement, and you're worried enough that you're willing to spend less in the first few years of retirement, or lock yourself into spending less for all of your years of retirement, and you think you could be quite comfortable on the, yes, inflation eroded returns in a guaranteed portfolio, why wouldn't you?
Okay.
Yeah. Your observation is absolutely right. It's just, again, if you pull the inflation thread, you have to make up for it somewhere else. And some people are totally fine with making that trade-off.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. And then, speaking of sequence of returns risk, when should Canadians start worrying about that? At what age? I mean, the most common kind of number that I've seen and read is basically sort of if you're 10 years out from retirement, that's kind of when you should start kind of worrying about it. You start looking at things on more of a micro level. You start thinking about this, asking these questions. Would you agree with that, or do you recommend something different?
Most of the research that I have read would suggest that the 5 years preceding and the 5 years immediately following retirement, and by retirement, I mean when you start spending out of your portfolio.
Okay.
Though that kind of those 2 5-year shoulders covering a 10-year span are the most sensitive to sequence of return risk. And in general, sequence of return risk shouldn't be the only thing that you're worried about as you plan for retirement. But as you get closer to within 10 or 5 years from retirement, the numbers get more precise, right? So not just sequence risk, but how much you would get from CPP if you stopped at this date versus that date, if you claimed it at 63 versus 65. You can plan for that 10 years out or 15 years out, but you can plan better for it the closer you get, because you can actually start to see precise numbers.
For sure, for sure. That sounds good. Yeah, 5 sounds a lot. 5 before and 5 years after sounds a lot more encouraging than 10 years before, 10 years after. So, 20 years, right? That's quite a bit.
The depressing truth is sequence risk matters all the time. But actually, what we want, you and I, we want markets to be down for the next 15 years while we're doing actually, maybe over the daycare years. Maybe we could just have markets do whatever they want to. But while we're ready to, the mortgage is paid off, we've got $50,000 a year to invest, we would like the markets to be just in the pits.
Right.
Sorry, every retiree from 15 years from now.
All right, that sounds good, Sandy. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some of these definitions that exist out here for Canadians.
Sure.
So there's a lot of definitions, a lot that Canadians have to sort of learn and know about, and it's pretty confusing. A lot of acronyms, and so what I thought we could do is really just go through some of them, and you could maybe define them for us, explain what they are, how it applies to everything, just to help get some clarity on this, because most people probably don't enjoy reading the CRA website.
What? That is news to me.
So I think coming from you, it might be more enjoyable.
Oh, well, can't make
instead
promises.
All right, so pressure's on, Sandy. All right, so to kick things off, can you talk about what a lira is?
Can we talk about an RPP first, because it'll make more sense?
Sure, let's do it.
So an RPP is, look, there's a lot of little technicalities that you would have to read the CRA website to really get. But essentially, an RPP is when you put money into a plan with your employer, and your employer either matches or contributes a certain amount with you. That's what we would call a defined contribution pension plan. There's a lot of different names for it, but it's your work plan, and it's one that your employer is also allowed to contribute to. So sometimes you'll see RPP, sometimes you'll see defined contribution pension plan. There's a lot of, I think I said that already, but there's lots of different names. But essentially, if your employer is also giving you money, it's a RPP.
Gotcha. And then finish what you were saying.
No, I was gonna skip right over to liras then.
Okay, all right. So, and then when it comes to RPPs, then we sort of get into the question of okay, when we're talking about pensions now, so can you talk about what a defined benefit plan is versus a defined contribution plan is as well?
Right. So defined contribution is you put money in and your employer puts money in, but essentially it's just an investable pot of money. Your employer has um, works with one particular financial institution usually, and that institution gives you a menu of investment choices. So there might be some target date funds in there. There might be a couple of different, like Badel Goodman and Sun Life something something fund. You probably see it every year. You have to review your statements.
Mhm.
Um, so you choose what investments go into, and at the end, either when you retire or when you leave that company, that pot of money is yours. Now we'll talk about kind of taxation reasons and constraints around that pot of money. But that's defined contribution. It's just you and your employer working together to invest, but it's your investment. You control how it's invested. Your employer might pay for some of the management costs, so it's cheaper than if you were buying those funds yourself, but that's about it. Defined benefit plan is you have an agreed upon percentage of your income, kind of very similar. You put money in, um, and then your employer also puts money in, but it's managed in a way so that you get a guaranteed payout at retirement. And that is, it acts much like an annuity does. You know, there's actuaries that talk about how long you're likely to live, and therefore that's how much money you get from your plan every year. Sometimes they're guaranteed indexed to inflation, sometimes they're not. Most of them have, and both defined contribution and defined benefit plans have rules about how much you have to, how much has to be available for your spouse if you should die as a retiree. But defined contribution plan is basically you can budget in retirement for having X amount of dollars every year for your lifetime, either indexed to inflation or not. And a defined contribution plan is you have a pot of money and you need to figure out how much you can take out every year and whether you're comfortable with, and you'll be exposed to sequence risk and everything else. Does that make sense?
Sounds good. Yeah, oh, it makes sense for sure. Yeah. So with defined contribution plan, I think it's safe to say that most Canadians who have sort of a regular job, maybe working at a I don't know, medium to large company, generally those companies will offer defined contribution plan. And so so for example, my wife works at BlackBerry right now, and so they have, you might be with Sun Life or Manulife or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
They have some sort of an arrangement, right? So now, she contributes X amount, they match it to a certain amount, and then she gets to pick, like you said, Sandy, from an array of options in terms of what that money goes into. And so that's sort of your her RPP. Would that be fair to say, Sandy?
Yep, you got it.
Okay, awesome. And then somebody that's, let's say, a firefighter, police officer, government employee, generally speaking, right? These are the individuals who have the defined benefit plans, which are teachers, for example,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Bankers. Some bankers
Bankers.
still have DB plans.
Oh,
Oh,
really?
yeah.
Nice. I didn't. I thought it was just government, primarily government employees, but that's
No, I mean that's I think more true in the States than it is here. And of course, we get a lot of news media stuff from the States talking about the death of the defined benefit pension plan. And while it's
Mhm.
true there are fewer defined benefit pension plans here in Canada, there's still a kind of more participation than I think you might suspect from
Hmm.
headlines in newspapers.
That's great.
Hmm.
That's great. So you can actually get that guaranteed income. That's
Yeah,
fantastic.
it's super valuable.
That's great. So if somebody wants that and they can't get a government job, there are options out there.
That's right.
So that's good. All right. So yeah. So let's move on to the lira now. Can you define that?
Right. So the lira is if you leave a company where you were a participant in a defined contribution plan or a defined benefit plan, one of the things that you need to do when you leave the company is decide whether you leave your money with them or you bring it over and you manage it all completely on your own. Now, typically in a defined contribution scenario, you always take it with you. You don't usually leave it at Sun Life, although Sun Life wants you to do that. You're outside of the plan. So if there were any discounts on management expense ratios for funds, those end because you're not, an active participant. But a lira,
Okay.
sorry, let me finish with the defined benefit too. And then with a defined benefit pension plan, you have the option to someday turn your pension on you don't earn any more like credits towards the eventual amount that you get every year, but you could just leave that money in the defined benefit pension plan and get some reduced amount at retirement age. Or you can take the actuarially adjusted, it's called the, oh, I know this word. Anyways, the commuted value. They'll offer you this amount per year starting at age 65, or this amount, which we think is based on kind of your life expectancy profile. If you were to take that money at age 65, this is the amount we think it would cost to fund your entire retirement. So you can have that now, but you can't just have it as cash. It has to go into a locked-in retirement account, a LIRA, which operates very similar to an RRSP. You typically can't put any of your own money in there anymore. It's locked in, although there are some exceptions. And until age 55, you really can't withdraw from it, except for under certain very specific situations. Like if you have kind of a health crisis, if you're in danger of losing your home. Most provinces have fairly similar legislation because locked-in retirement accounts are entirely governed by the province that they originate in. Some of them are federal, but anyways, there's like 13 different sets of rules, essentially. But 55 is the year where you could unlock some of your money, and then you could just put it into an RRSP or take it as cash and pay the tax on it. And the only other thing that's different from a LIRA to an RRSP, except for that locked-in part, once you convert a LIRA into a life income fund, similar to a registered retirement income fund or a RIF that people talk about, there is not only a minimum amount that you have to withdraw, but there is also a maximum amount that you can't withdraw above. So RIFs have no maximum, LIFs have a maximum as well. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. Yeah, that was my next question: is what is a life income fund? So I think you answered that pretty well. So it's basically like a RIF, except that it comes from your LIRA, and there is that extra rule where there's actually a maximum that you're allowed to withdraw as well. Sure. Whereas with your RSP, you could theoretically withdraw everything all at once, even though that would probably destroy you from a taxation perspective. But assuming you had a lot of money in there.
There are some situations where it might be appropriate, but no.
Yeah. But generally speaking, you don't take out all your RRSP savings at once if you have any significant amount in there.
Typically.
Because then you'll get put in the highest bracket and you'll be crying. So unless you just like paying taxes, but yeah. Anyways, I digress. So moving on. What? Can you talk about what a locked-in retirement income fund is?
So a locked-in retirement income fund is there's an LRIF and there's a LIF and there's a new LIF. All of these things are essentially the same idea. It's money that is, the income in it is tax sheltered in the same way that it is in a RIF. You have to take a certain mandated minimum withdrawal from it. But I mean, essentially the difference between an LRIF and an LIF is very small. I mean, to the point where it's pretty rare that the difference would really have any impact on the decisions that you make about your retirement or about your spending.
Okay, sounds good. And then with kind of in that same bucket, there's also the prescribed registered retirement income fund, yet another acronym. Can you talk about that?
Essentially it's the same thing. It's another locked-in retirement account. And again, if you are, some provinces call things one thing and some things call it another, or some provinces call it another. So in general, if it says registered and income fund, in some way you have to take money out of it. If it ends in IF, you have to take money out of it. And the income that's earned inside is tax-free until it's withdrawn. If it ends in SP or PP, it's probably money that you're not withdrawing and it's just collecting in some way. So whether it's prescribed or not prescribed or locked in or whatever, I mean, those are all important, but in different small ways.
And it all sounds pretty confusing because it's just one acronym after the other.
And they all have R's and P's. Yeah. It's just like 5 letters that they just rearrange every time.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's RIF, which is RRIF, and then there's the LRIF, which is now with 1 R instead, but now there's an L in front. So there's just makes things interesting. But anyway, so I think kind of the bottom line here is if you if you're getting kind of maybe overwhelmed by all this, or if you feel you want some more detail, realistically, when you get to that level where, let's say, you're approaching retirement, let's say you're 5 years, 10 years out, I mean, I personally feel at that point you should, if you don't already have a financial planner, you should at least get somebody kind of qualified, that's experienced with this. At that point, you sit down with them, they can see which one kind of applies to your situation, because you can't just look at your RRSP, right? You have to look at, okay, well, you might have someone in RRSP, you might have some in TFSA, you might have some in both, you might have some in your RPP as well. And then how do we convert this strategically to save on tax? There's all these different gears, and do you have side income as well? Like, there's just all these all these things you have to take into account, and it's really hard to pull off yourself, I would argue, if this isn't something that you do kind of on an everyday basis, because as you can see, there's a lot of acronyms, it's complicated, and also things change as well, right? Like the government can change different rules, they may add different things, but especially if you're sort of younger, like in my situation, right, where we don't really know what's going to happen 30 years from now, if there's going to be something new or whatever the case may be. So kind of bottom line here is, this is sort of just to give you the listeners a little bit of a primer, and then just to sort of hopefully make you a little bit less overwhelmed by this. But then just keep in mind that, yeah, if you still have some follow-up questions, I mean, that's when, when you're at that level, that's where you get somebody like Sandy, or someone that's qualified like Sandy, kind of in this area, and you talk to them and they sort of help you out specific to your situation, because everyone is a little bit different. So I just thought I'd mention that as well.
I concur.
Sounds good. All right. Okay, that's great. So thanks for clearing that up, Sandy, because yeah, lots of acronyms, lots of confusion, and I totally, when you look at all these things, I totally understand why it's kind of, I would say, one of the top two questions that I get asked from the show is, the first question is generally, how do I actually get started in investing? What's an ETF? How does it work? All these, what is index investing, things of that nature. And then the second most common one is individuals who are, okay, well, I've already been investing, and now how the heck do I deal with this now that I'm actually about to use all this money? So I'm glad you shed some light on this, and hopefully cleared some things up as well.
Hopefully.
and if not, you do you can help Canadians out with this stuff as well to clear things up. So I feel they're in good hands. All right, so that's great. Now just kind of shifting focus slightly, one of the things, when it comes to retirement planning, we talked about this a little bit, about the returns that Canadians can expect on stocks and bonds, and then there's the average, and there's all these different ways of looking at it, and obviously you have to somehow try to forecast the returns you're going to get. Can you talk a little bit about this? What numbers do you use? Can you talk about real versus nominal returns as well, for those that aren't familiar, and maybe just some caveats to be careful of? You already brought this up a little bit as well, like using the average, and then you look at sequence of returns. But yeah, maybe if you can discuss a little bit.
Sure.
When it comes to that.
Well, one of the resources that I am very grateful to have is the PWL Capital Great Expectations white paper that they put out every year. So if you're not familiar, PWL Capital is the company that Dan Bortolotti, who is the Canadian couch potato, works with now as an advisor. And so he and Justin Bender, maybe not Justin, maybe it's somebody else in the firm, they put out a white paper that uses two different approaches to sort of come to a kind of an average expectation of what the next sort of 10, 15 years of market returns will look like. So, and trying to forecast market returns over 40 years seems a little silly. But not forecasting at all also seems silly. Like, well, I don't know. There's no way to know, so let's not plan at all. That is obviously anathema to my personality. So when it comes to, so there's actually kind of three levels of returns that I like to talk about. And the first one is sort of market returns, right? So, as with the classic 60-40 example portfolio, what the kind of white paper is saying is based on kind of the mathematics of bond yields and what we expect from equity, the equity portion of a portfolio. A 60-40 portfolio in the market would, over the next 10 years, be likely to earn kind of 5.5% or thereabouts. Now, one caveat, it's very silly for me to even be using decimal points. Like the idea that we can be precise enough to come within 50 basis points. Right. But I'm going to use them anyway because that's just the way that my mind works. But please know that I know how ridiculous it is.
Are you sure it's not 5.6, Sandy?
Let's go back and do
We
the
should
calculations.
we should argue that point.
That's right. So that's market returns, but we know that you and I cannot participate purely in the market without paying any money for it. So whether you're just buying stocks and bonds, you're paying commissions, bid-ask spreads, and trading costs. If you're buying mutual funds or ETFs, there is some amount of management expense ratio. So just below market returns, I would say your nominal return. So the nominal return is just, over 15 years, I earned 5.5%. Well, but I think I'm going to earn 5.5%, but I'm with somebody that's, it's charging me 1%. So in fact, I'm going to earn 4.5%. So your nominal return, after you take fees into account, 4.5%. So obviously there's a lot of scope for making adjustments because you can control your fees in a way that you cannot control market returns. It's a theme. It's the theme of Sandy's life, is talking about controlling costs. But then we also have to say, well, we know inflation is a real thing. So I didn't actually earn 4.5% because the stuff that I want to buy with the investments that I earned 4.5% on increased in cost over that same 10-year period by 2%, let's say. Let's say we think inflation is going to be 2%. So that means instead of getting 4.5%, I got 2.5%. Now, those numbers sound bleak and terrible. I don't mean them to sound that way, but I think it's more important to have conservative or kind of conservative/realistic expectations about what the market can do for you when you're planning for your retirement or saving towards a particular goal than it is to say, well, that's dumb. That's too conservative. I know I'm going to earn 8% because that's what the market has done for the past 10 years. Of course, that's my personality. I would much rather be surprised on the good side than surprised on the bad side and actually have earned 2.5% when I really thought I was going to earn 4.5%. So nominal returns is just kind of the actual number you put on it. Real returns is that number, but adjusted for what it actually can buy in the future. Does that make sense? I should stop asking you if it makes sense. I'm going to stop now. I promise.
No, it makes sense, Eddie. That's great. Thanks. Okay, so next question is regarding annuities. So some Canadians consider purchasing annuities for their retirement. Can you talk a little? You brought it up a couple of times, but can you define what an annuity actually is, and just maybe tell us as well what your thoughts are on annuities?
Annuities are the redheaded stepchild of retirement income products. So the first thing I'll say is that I am not an expert in what we would say is product allocation. So not only we know asset allocation, right? Like bonds, stocks, real estate, emerging markets, whatever. That's asset allocation. Product allocation is, you could say RRSP, TFSA, but more realistically, you would say kind of investments that are exposed to the market in some amount and kind of guaranteed streams of income like an annuity. But annuities are really out of fashion, partially because there's kind of a whole skeevy kind of thing about them, like they're sold on commission and they're really opaque products. It's hard for people who aren't money nerds, and even for me who is a money nerd, to really grasp all of the elements that go into pricing an annuity. Also, they're unfashionable because they're guaranteed income. So of course the insurance company that's issuing them has to have almost a guaranteed stream of income to make good on their promises, which means they promise a lot less because guaranteed income right now, as we know with interest rates, is very, very low. So people also look at it and say, well, I'm getting less than I would if I had a GIC and withdrew from that GIC over 25 years than I'm getting from an income annuity. The thing is about annuities. Now, when I talk about annuities, I'm not talking about variable or index linked or any of those things. I'm really just talking plain vanilla. You give them money and they start giving you income the next month or whatever. So anything else I'm going to leave to people who sell them because I'm not going to talk about them. But the reality is an annuity is not just, you don't evaluate the value of an annuity to you by kind of how much investment return you received from it. You're evaluating it as some insurance for how long you might live. So longevity protection, right? If you're really worried about outliving your money, then part of your income should be guaranteed for life. So for people that don't have a defined benefit pension plan or were self-employed all their lives and have very little CPP or any number of reasons, or have a particularly high need to spend in the first few years or first number of years in retirement because let's say they haven't paid their mortgage off or something like that. Yes, you're trading lower lifetime income to buy an annuity and have that guarantee. but I think that they should not be as unfashionable as they are. And I have two things on my wish list. One, that people would read more about them and just kind of come to understand the role that the concept of mortality credits. I mean, there's a lot of reading you could do that just kind of helps people to conceptualize what the value of an annuity is. And then the other thing is, I wish annuities were less opaque and that more people, that you could either buy them direct from the insurance company, which you really can't right now, or insurance brokers didn't sell anything else and only sold annuities and weren't trying to sell people on guaranteed minimum withdrawal and I don't know, all the other stuff that's in there. There are actually really good resources to learn a little bit more about annuities. There's a couple of there's a lot of resources, but one of them is actually here in Canada, Pensionize Your Nest Egg by Moshe Milevsky. He's one of the people that I mentioned earlier talking about sequence risk. And Alexandra McQueen, they wrote a book and recently updated it for the international market. But the Canadian one has a blue cover and is still quite good. I obviously I could talk a lot about annuities too.
That's good. Yeah. So Sadie, maybe what we'll do is we'll put those links in the show notes.
Sure.
And so if you could send those resources to me or just the links to them,
Yeah.
I'll be sure to, just from what you brought up and also everything else you brought up earlier too. Like you mentioned the white paper as well, just to sort of set the expectations for the returns, things like that. I can definitely include that in the show notes so that everyone can just go on there and check them out. So that sounds great.
Good.
All right. So that's all for my sort of technical questions. Can you tell us a little bit more, more about yourself and the free consultation that you offer to Canadians?
Well, I mean, a lot of retirement planning or any kind of financial planning has to do with how you learn information and what pieces you don't know and what pieces you need somebody else to check you on or fill you in on. So it seems sort of silly to me to tell people I do financial planning, pay me money and I'll do it for you without having a conversation about it first.
Right.
Because I just had a very long sort of Twitter, I won't call it an argument, but it was almost an argument last night with somebody who was talking about how easy it is to, just invest in index ETFs and all of your financial problems are solved, essentially. But I think there's a lot of intimidation around financial planning in the financial services industry, partially because people suspect conflict of interest, and partially because we in the industry have done a really good job of intimidating people. Like, you don't know anything, so you need to talk to an expert, which I don't think for the most part is true. People are experts on their own lives, hopefully on the way that they spend their money, although there's room for improvement there, I think. What they want out of life, their goals, all of those things, people are actually much smarter than they give themselves credit for. And they're afraid to come and talk to somebody like me because they think I'm going to start talking about PPRIFs or, just speaking in acronyms all the time. And that's not the way that I operate. Although some people want to do that. Some people are only interested in, tax optimization to the nth degree. But so how do we know that we would work really well together until we've actually spoken to each other? You can talk about what's important to you. I can talk about kind of how I think we should approach it. And we come to some sort of consensus on how much that should cost. I mean, obviously, I'm a business owner. I have sort of set prices for my time and have put things together in packages or whatever. But I don't believe that it's my job to impose the kind of financial planning that I do and the questions that I think you should be asking on you. I think you should be able to ask me questions. And I should work to help you either understand the answer or understand why that might be a bit of a rabbit trail. And maybe we should focus on this because this is actually more important to your long-term success. Anyways, of course, it's obvious from this conversation that I like talking. And I think people should have a chance to talk before kind of we get into any sort of formal engagement.
That's great, Sadie. Thanks so much for explaining that. And that sounds great. So yeah, I'll definitely have a link to your site and your resources and all of that in the show notes. Of course, you're in the directory as well. And so you can kind of see another interview with Sandy there too, where we talk more specifically about her and her practice and what she offers and her experience. That's great, Sandy. Thanks so much for all of that. And that's all the questions that I had. So thank you.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for letting me take an hour and talk your ear off.
I enjoyed it very much. Thanks, Sandy. All right, I hope you enjoyed the interview with Sandy. You can get all the resources she mentioned for free by going to the show notes over at buildwealthcanada.ca/28. So just the number 28. Also, while you're there, you can sign up for the free 30-minute one-on-one consultation with Sandy that we talked about, who can basically help you answer questions like, are you actually on track to retire? Did you maybe miss something in your retirement analysis that can really hurt you long term? What's the best way to take out income from your portfolio to minimize taxes? And this is probably one of the most common questions I get when it comes to retirement planning. Also, are you actually saving enough for retirement? How much do you need to save so that you can actually retire comfortably and live in the kind of lifestyle that you want? And when can you retire? Maybe based on what you have right now in your lifestyle, maybe you can fully retire right now, or maybe even semi-retire right now. Maybe you never even thought that would be possible, but it might be. So definitely something worth looking into if that's your ambition. Also, when should you choose to take your CPP and OAS? Obviously, there are advantages to delaying receiving these, but what's the best move for you? What's the best strategy for you based on all the revenue that you'll have coming in, based on your income, your investments, etc.? And what kind of lifestyle can you expect when you retire based on your current savings? Should you maybe step up your savings rate? Do you think maybe you've already saved enough to live the kind of lifestyle that you want? What is it specifically for you? Also, how can you help ensure that you don't actually run out of money in your retirement? Obviously, something we should all be very, very knowledgeable about to not really get ourselves into any sort of catastrophic situation. And really, you can ask her anything else that you'd like to know to help ensure that you are able to retire on your own terms and live the type of lifestyle that you want in retirement. So once again, the link for the free resources and the free consultation is buildwealthcanada.ca/28. So just the number 28. All right. I look forward to seeing you there. Cheers and have a great week. All right. Take care. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Build Wealth Canada podcast at www.buildwealthcanada.ca.